Robot in 3 Days has become a massive inspiration for many of those in the FRC community. Starting over a decade ago with the original Ri3D 1.0 team, Robot in 3 Days has expanded to encompass dozens of programs, each year creating quick builds to help FRC teams learn, extrapolate, and expand off of these designs and the testing that has led up to them. For the Crescendo season, we took a look and ranked 17 of these teams that you can dive into to take bits and pieces up to help your team. I'm joined by 4 fun correspondents who independently ranked these 17 teams, and scoring is average and broken down into 3 categories with a maximum of 25 points awarded. Starting out with practicality. Can teams build or learn or create something better off of this robot? Bonus points awarded for good documentation with up to 10 points awarded for this category. Performance. How well did this robot perform in its showcase, and what is the potential for this robot in the Crescendo game to actually compete, with up to 10 points awarded? Wow factor. Is this something that's going to inspire teams? Up to 5 points awarded for this category. Scores ranked all the way from 4.75 total points all the way up to our first ever perfect score with 25 points in Fun's Ri3D rankings. Just a few notes to make. We did try to judge robots that were specifically competing in the Robot in 3 Days challenge, and didn't judge teams that had more of a specific goal of building the kitbot with maybe a kitbot plus. Even though a couple of our teams in this rankings ended up doing something like this, we tried to figure out who would best fit for the Robot in 3 Days ranking specifically. Also, robots that may have had advanced knowledge of the game like Rev's Ion Starterbot won't be on this list, but we definitely recommend checking out all these teams and programs, and it's always possible that we miss somebody too. No matter where teams ranked, or even if it's your Ri3D team, we know that all teams put in a great effort to help teams inspire and make them better. And remember, these are just our panelist rankings. Let's have fun and hop in and check out these incredible Robot in 3 Days teams for the Crescendo game. This video on Fun is brought to you by viewers like you and also in partnership with the following. AndyMark is your one-stop shop for all your robotics competition needs. Celebrating 20 years of quality robotics parts and superior service, AndyMark employees have over 200 years of first-team experience. From mechanical and electrical products to tools and hardware, head on over to andymark.com for high-quality and affordable solutions. Discover how Kettering University students engineer their success with Kettering's amazing co-op employment programs where students earn great pay and gain valuable experience. Those accepted into Kettering University can apply for a robotics scholarship, providing up to an additional $5,000 a year in tuition assistance. Head on over to kettering.edu/first to learn more and apply. Starting off on number 17 on our list is the first Alumni Mentor Network of Michigan, say that 5 times fast, Ri3D, practicality 2.25, performance 1.5, and wow, down in the one a little bit lower level of that, James. So break down this team and what you saw.
So this team went for a somewhat unique design, however, it just unfortunately did not work out for them. The robot is a relatively simple design, and had it worked out, it would have made for a good climber and possibly AMP scorer. AMP scoring, I feel, is something that robots are not really taking seriously this year, as the kit robot being unable to easily score in the AMP may lead to it being undervalued this season. I was really hopeful when I first started seeing some stuff from this team, but like I said, it just didn't really work out. One thing I would like to see from them in the future is some better documentation. Without knowing why this didn't work out and just seeing it not working, it doesn't really tell you how to avoid the pitfalls. So just even if something doesn't work out, as something happened later on with one of the other Robot in 3 Days, it'd be good to see why it didn't work out and how to possibly avoid it in the future.
Yeah, overall, you know, the first Alumni Mentor Network of Michigan has been around for a long time for things. And, you know, like you said, James, sometimes things work out, things don't work out for things. But documentation is so important in the Robot in 3 Days process, and we definitely want to see more out of that. At number 16 on our list is a newcomer. It's a Ri3D Mexico, or MX, on there. We didn't have too much from video content to judge this team off of, a few things on Instagram as well, too. But this is a good demonstration of what the robot looks like, Nick.
Yeah, that's one thing I really liked, is this team came up with an interesting design, allowing for scoring both the speaker and amp by tipping up the entire kitbot shooter assembly to aim down it. However, the tipping action could hold up match performance on account of its speed, and I wasn't able to find much documentation for how the robot worked. Online, they really only seem to post a couple things on Instagram. One unique thing about this team that could be helpful for some teams is that the records are entirely in Spanish. potentially breaching a language gap that could exist for some FRC teams going into the season.
Yeah, that's so true, by the way, with that. We have a couple new international teams to the scene this year as well, too. And great to see that there is a team from Mexico that is creating content for teams as well, too. So a great start, for things. There's always improvements to be had with this, but it was cool to see R3D starting to get even more international each year. Up next in 15 is the first alumni network of Grand Valley Robot in 3 days. Here's Samantha, break down this team for us.
Yeah, okay, so this robot, it's a very simple design. It doesn't have many moving parts, but it only picks up from the source and dumps into the amp. It does seem to be pretty consistent, and a lot of their issues might be because of the cardboard they used, and that just is giving some compliance that wouldn't be there in the actual field. As far as documentation and content, I could only find the live stream, so there's not like a ton of how they got there, but this does seem like a very simple base you could build other mechanisms off or derive from.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a new team or not. I can't remember off the top of my head on this. I think it's cool to show, a team from that is showing like, hey, like this is a robot doing a very specific thing. So teams that, if this is what it's for you, it's possible to look at doing that. A lot of teams that are on here have ground intakes on here. So it's kind of cool to see a team that doesn't have a ground intake and what that could look like. But, obviously from a wow factor, pretty low overall. It's not something that's going to really inspire teams and stuff, but very practical to build, or pretty practical to build from a robot standpoint.
And I will also say I love the name, Dumpy.
Nice. Love it.
I will say it is nice to see like one of our first swerve drive bases robot in 3 days, at least in terms of this ranking, and then showing just like how swerve works with having a robot that may not be able to adjust its scoring mechanism, but just being able to slide in and out would be nice. The only thing I would have liked to have seen from them is just something to cover up the electronics and the giant gap in that robot, because that robot just screams getting a note stuck inside of it. So if a team were to copy it, I would hope they would take that initiative.
At number 14 is Western Engineering, Practicality 3.75, Performance a respectable 5 out of that. While factor a little bit lower on that end, but Tussie, break down this team and what you saw.
Yeah, so this robot, I've enjoyed it. It has a within bumper intake, which is really unique, especially with the new rule of having basically a bumper around the entire robot. So being able to pick up within the robot means nothing is exceeding the 1 foot limit. So with that, it also has a basically similar kitbot shooter, but otherwise the pass through is really smooth within the built within robot intake. But also the climbing mechanism is a bit wonky. They have a hook that is put on by Velcro, and then they have a gearbox that wraps around the rope that they have for their hook to climb up the chain, which that rope could be a bit fragile depending on how the use case and the tightness of the rope. But other than that, the pass through you can kind of see has been pretty smooth. It does lock up a little bit, but otherwise they have a wheel at the bottom of their shooter to center the robot, center the note, and then be able to shoot it out. So it's a kit bot with with a unique intake system, and it does really well with the amplifier, but also does pretty well with the speaker as well.
It's the first time I've seen sim motors in a long time on a shooter wheel, by the way. So interesting for that. I love the pass-through intake idea. I think it's great that they're demoing the possibilities to work. The game piece this year, the Note, is a very interesting game piece. So I think we will see a decent amount of robots with the pass-through intake on it. I don't know anybody else from your teams and what you're working with if you're considering this type of strategy or not, but what are your thoughts?
Well, the Note and the pass-through, it and built-in within the robot intake, it is a bit of a struggle with space because you also have a 120-inch frame perimeter maximum, so it is kind of hard, especially if you're using swerve, because swerve takes up a bunch of space. But with a tank, it's very possible, but also some teams might also just try to do the pull-out intake to the 1 foot extension, because that's what we've been used to for the past couple of years. But within built-in the robot intake is also unique and saves a bunch of space, so you don't have to worry about the 1 foot extension. So it's a good strategy, and the shooter again overall is great. Sim motor also, I mean, is a legacy motor, and a bunch of teams still use it to this day. It's a great motor. Of course, there's a bunch of improvements nowadays. You can move to brushless and such, but it's still a great motor overall and does exactly what it needs to do.
One thing that I do think is a little underrated on this robot is we talked about the climb, but just as soon as that hook is on, they are up quick. Like, compared to even some of the teams that are ranked higher than them on the list, their climb is very, very fast.
Yeah, especially since it's powered by two sim motors, it just ramps up really fast. So yeah, it's really fast.
We're on to number 13. It's Killer Rabbits RI3D Practicality 5.5, Performance 4.25, and Wow Factor 2. Overall, starting to rise up a bit in those ranks there, James. What'd you see amongst this team?
So, Killer Rabbits, I believe, is a new robot in 3 days this year. They're from the Kansas City area. They built a robot that was capable of scoring on the speaker, and I was actually surprised to see that because it looked like it was an amp-only robot. The ground intake scoring mechanism for the amp is very simple, and I could even see something like it being integrated into the Kit of Parts bot this year. They did a fairly good job at documenting and keeping teams updated. The post that we're looking at right now on Delphi is very thorough and pretty well done. But some more accessible CAD and code could go a long way in helping teams figure out what's going on. Also, just even a more proper video breaking down the robot in action as opposed to just a series of short GIFs or small videos would have gone a long way in helping teams figure out what's going on, especially with their shooter that looks like it may have some issues getting the height needed to score into the speaker.
I personally, for me, like, obviously we create a lot of videos here at Fun, right? But I don't mind this route of going more of that, like, kind of the open alliance build blog route for things. I agree with you. Some more videos that are a little bit more in depth on what is going on is great. But for being what it is in a post, I think they did a pretty decent job of explaining a lot of this as well too. Which is why Practicality are going to get a decent score for that too. With it, anybody else see anything in this robot that stood out to you?
I love their angle system that they have. It's just, and also with swerve for RI3D, being able to do all of that was just really impressive, and being able to shoot and everything like that has just been really impressive. I enjoyed this robot. And again, the documentation is great and all, so really highly recommend to take a look at.
Coming at number 12, here's an interesting intro to a video. It's Central Lakes College robot in 3 days with Practicality 3.25. Pretty decent performance for this team, and wow, 2.25. Nick, run us through this robot.
Yeah, this team produced a very unique design, not particularly similar to any of the RI3 teams I'm aware of. However, they don't have a ton of great documentation. To my knowledge, only a robot reveal video, and according to that video's comments section, they do not have CAD drawings of the robot to provide as a building guide. Still, their unique approach in multiple regards is very interesting. They merged all node scoring into one relatively small assembly, an interesting idea, and made their climber work with a pairing of pneumatics and a winch, an interesting combo that I think could be good inspiration for teams. Also, I was definitely entertained by the fact that they brought the robot out onto the snowy streets for their reveal video.
Yeah, some pretty big tires that are on that as well too. I would like to see it driving on that as well, but maybe not worth the risk for that. Anybody else in the panelist area? Any comments in regards to this interesting climber they have? From a strength perspective, that I think it could be maybe a little bit questionable if they can pull themselves up.
With the climber specifically, one thing I do like is that they showed it climbing off-center, which is a skill that's going to be very useful as the season goes on and people are trying to get that harmony. Another thing that I liked about it is that intake mechanism, intake shooter all in one. It kind of is almost Great Claw looking in design, so I could see potentially teams who are used to using that in previous games being familiar with at least the architecture going on and being able to replicate that even without a lot of documentation.
Coming up in number 11 is Pride of the North, UND, Practicality 4.25, Performance Respectable 5.75, and wow, kind of right in the middle for this whole team on here. Samantha, run us through this robot and its features.
Yeah, so this robot overall, it's fairly good. So the first thing that stood out to me is they have that kind of flap that's a multi-purpose source and amp scoring. So that's a nice dual-purpose mechanism, seems to be integrated, working nicely. And then they're also able to shoot out of the speaker with that same kind of mechanism, but just shooting really fast. Um, it's like a moderate level of complexity, so it's not like the simplest, but it's not hugely complex. So it's good for um, teams to look at who have maybe done a little bit and been like,
Yeah, a little bit questionable CG there, I think, potentially, but robot-wise,
Yeah,
overall, pretty cool.
the climb is slow. I was nervous they weren't going to make it, but it does get up there eventually.
You know, with this team on here, a couple things that stood out to me on it, it's kind of like a combination of two of the robots that we saw earlier, right? The one that kind of had just that flipper thing on top, and then there was one that was more of that modified kit bot for things as well, too. This is, to me, is kind of that combination or amalgamation of the two of these bots. And then intake-wise, I thought was kind of interesting, having that flipper intake. I maybe would like to see a little bit wider intake out of that if we're judging it based on the robot merits for it. But I thought, you know, robot overall-wise, this is definitely a robot that could run cycles in this game. We hope you're enjoying this video here on Fun. If so, do make sure you click that subscribe button to stay up to date on all Fun YouTube videos and give the video a thumbs up. It really does help. We'd like to thank this show's sponsor, Kettering University, for their support of Fun. Those who are accepted in the Kettering University are eligible to receive up to $5,000 a year in a robotics scholarship. Head on over to kettering.edu/first to get more information about Kettering University and the robotics scholarship. Over 30% of those who attend Kettering University were in high school robotics, so go attend somewhere that has so many other people like you at kettering.edu/first. In number 10, top 10 we're coming into is AC Robotics Robot in 3 Days. Once again, starting to rise up quite a bit. Didn't quite wow us as much as some of the other teams on there, but Steve, tell us more about them.
Yeah, so AC Robotics, they have a very similar to the Kitbot with the wheels and the shooter and also, but they added something really unique, which is this pneumatic piston just for the amplification. They shoot the note and then they eject their pneumatic piston at a perfect timing just so the note is sitting there. And then once they're at the amplification, they just drop the piston and then the note goes in, which is really important since the cooperation bonus is really important for tiebreakers. But overall, they're able to shoot into the speaker. They're able to do the amplification really well, which seems like their main purpose of this robot with the piston. But otherwise, can only intake from the source. They don't have a ground intake or anything like that. So they have to intake from the source and then pull the note all the way down for them to be able to shoot it back up, or they can just eject it a little bit to go on the pneumatic piston. But so otherwise, it's a modified kit bot overall.
James, how do you feel about this pneumatic piston method that they're using?
So one of my biggest complaints about the kitbot this year was its just inability to handle the amp, and like I said earlier, I thought that was going to lead to a lot of teams just not being able to do it and it being an underrated game piece. This is such a weirdly elegant, simple solution to add to the kitbot, super easy to solve the issue with not being able to score in the amp. I don't know how good their documentation was, because I know that sometimes for new teams bringing in pneumatics can lead to headaches during inspection or just in the matches in general, but it looks pretty good as like a team's first introduction to pneumatics. I really like it as a nice simple addition to the kit apart spot.
Coming in at number 9 is Big Sky Robotics Robot in 3 Days. Kind of middle of the pack once again for rankings 5.25 and practicality, performance 5.5, and wow, a little bit above average 2.75. James.
Yeah, so Big Sky is a second-year Robot in 3 Days team, and unfortunately they encountered an issue during their build, and they didn't realize that in the transition with their ground intake from ground to its scoring, it actually exceeded the extension limit. Even with that limitation, if they're not picking up from the ground, it's a really capable robot, being able to do everything except for the trap. They were very forthcoming in their video about having this issue and that they realized it too late, and that it's a thing that teams need to also accept. They said it's no one's fault. It was the whole team didn't notice the issue, and they are planning on releasing a CAD and code for this robot with it completely within compliance. My favorite thing about this is, like I said, even without that ground intake, this will be a really fast amp cycler with a super stable climb. Its speaker shooting seems a little less reliable than just the standard kitbot. You can see in that last clip that they're coming in like almost at a weird diagonal. So I don't like that as much, but looking at it with even the documentation they have now with the illegal intake, it's really nice. They have CAD, they have code, they have so much stuff. And compared to their outing last year, this robot is much nicer packaged, and it's much better documented. So I really hope they continue to make these robot in 3 days heading into next year and seasons to come.
Yeah, one thing, I actually rated them a decent bit higher because, in my view, if they can get that overextension thing fixed, I think they're, in my opinion, one of the best ones that were in RI3D, simply because they can consistently do the amp, they appear to be able to consistently do the shooter, they have a solid ground intake. I think they'll be a solid model if they can get that extension fixed.
Coming up in number 8, a nice performance here by North Dakota State, RI3D Practicality 5.25, high performance at 7, and right in the middle of the road of that wow factor. Nick, tell us more about this team.
Yeah, this team came in with some very nice updates and modifications to the kitbot, adding an under-the-bumper floor intake, and providing teams with a nice model for that, as well as a potential model for a winch-style climber, using the robot to pull the hook off their base. That climber is a very unique take for teams to take a look at, and it's also nice to see an example of that under-the-bumper intake, as only a small handful of these RI3D teams went for that. The documentation is also decent. They have some nice YouTube videos going over various aspects of the robot, such as the manufacturing process, and a nicely edited reveal. So I can always appreciate a funny name. Their robot is named Kevin.
One of the things with this robot in here, you mentioned like a modified kitbot. I think they've done quite a bit past that, because if you look at like the wheel configuration, or even kind of the wheels being a little bit outside of, or not contained within what that shooter ramp is for things as well. I thought North Dakota State overall did a great job for that. I'm not a big fan of winch climbers personally for stuff. I don't really like encouraging it within teams, especially for this year's game personally. But overall, I thought this is a pretty well packaged machine.
Yeah, so something I noticed in their amp scoring, they don't have a backing into their amp, so I'm not sure if their amp score would work on a like 2-spec field.
Yeah, given what we saw with Cranberry Alarm and their attempts to do similar things, I don't think it would. But it'll be interesting to see if someone tests it with a properly backed amp.
Coming up in number 7 is the Robot and Centaur, the Robot in 100 Hours. It's the Sherbrooke team coming in. Practicality 6.25, Performance 6.75, and Wow 2.75. We're specifically talking about their Radius robot that they have. They did build 2 robots on here, but the Radius one really stood out to us, and we want to talk more about it. So Samantha, break down this robot for us.
Yeah, so this robot's nicely packaged, it's pretty slick, it works well. They've got the nice under-the-bumper intake, goes up to their flywheels. Their amp shooter is a little iffy. I think they're just not able to get a steep enough angle downwards to do that. But I did like that their speaker, it worked to shoot into the speaker. Their climber is integrated into their frame of like their hopper or whatever you want to call it. So that's some nice integration to see there.
I think there's a lot that anybody can learn off of something like this, right? Because you don't necessarily need, the volume all the time for this as well. But the Sherbrooke team, I remember them last year as well too. I think the one thing that really stood out to me was their the path that the note goes through their shooter. I thought was kind of funky, where they have essentially one that's kind of more straight, or they're asymmetrical in how their 2 arms are. Essentially, I'm not sure we'll be able to go back exactly to where that is, but if you do see that, like right here, you see how kind of that note goes through. I thought that was really interesting to see, but it looks like it's quite effective for what it is.
These notes can be compressed and stretched weirdly, and they will still end up flying out pretty much straight. So
yeah, so congratulations to the Sherbrooke team coming in. Another great year for Robot in 3 days, and can't wait to see, of course, what they do out of Canada as well too. In number 6 is Zoukeepers Ri3D. We've seen a couple great implementations by this team before. Practicality is 6, Performance 6.25, and a pretty cool looking robot as we see some of the extensions out here, Tassif.
Yeah, like you said, pretty cool robot. They have a really nice, basically like clean pass system with their intake to their shooter. Their shooter is also has an angle motion, so you can basically shoot the note wherever. They also have a front flip into the amplifier, which is really nice. They also have a hook for the climb, omni wheels on all 4 corners, so they just basically act like a swerve robot without having swerve. So really impressive robot, and I've loved what they've done this year and what they've done previous years. Again, note shooter, really nice drop down intake, and really clean pass through. Able to shoot into the speaker, put in the amplifier. Just overall, really clean robot, and really something that teams can look at with being able to shoot at different places in the field. That pivot will be very useful.
Honestly, I'm a bit more worried about the all Omni-wheel drive.
Yeah.
It feels very susceptible to defense because if someone wants to defend you, they can very easily push you sideways.
I wonder from that if it's going to be one of those that, you know, they just look at going to the safe zones, because with having such a congested field, you might be able to just essentially bounce off of other robots potentially. But yeah, I didn't think we'd see Omni drives back potentially for this year.
Yeah, I mean, Omni drives could be a bit wonky, like you said, against defense and such, but being such a small and potentially light robot, just be able to zoom around the field and just turn basically however you want, it could be pretty effective overall. I've seen teams do Omni drives and just zoom around the field and just go in circles against everyone.
One last thing I just want to mention with the intake arm, you saw in that one video, it was a little bit slow kind of going in. Definitely some good PID tuning is going to make that transfer process go much quicker with that as well. And we did see that the amp score that was kind of similar to what Cranberry Alarm shows in theirs, where it's like, yeah, it can work, but how often is it actually going to work as well too? But Zoukeeper still a great robot. Congratulations to them on a great season. We'd like to thank AndyMark and AndyMark.com for their continued support of fun content. AndyMark.com is your one-stop shop for all your competition robotics needs. Featuring over 200 years of combined experience, AndyMark has now been in business for 20 years, servicing first teams and beyond. From electrical and mechanical, anything you may need, go to AndyMark.com to see how they can help your team and to get some of the best quality parts and the superior service that your team deserves. Let's get into our top 5 here for the 2024 Robot in 3 Days rankings list. And it's going to be RI3D Purdue. As somebody who didn't do rankings, it was cool to see Purdue making the top 5. A lot of great competitors here. Let's go to James first and hear about this robot and what made them get into the top 5 rankings this year.
Yeah, the Robot in 3 Day out of Purdue University is a first-year Robot in 3 Days team. This is a really impressive robot that can easily be replicated by other teams. Probably the best multi-use intake, making use of it for amp scoring as well as direct feeding into the top of the speaker shooter. This seems like the easiest robot to adapt into a kitbot and become a multi-threat team. I do wish they had a bit more documentation. There's not a whole lot available right now, and had there been more, it would have been helpful to teams and most likely would have had Purdue make it higher on our list.
Yeah, one thing I had looking at that robot is I'm a tiny bit worried about how consistent that amp actually is. It's just, I don't know if this is correct or not, but it kind of looks like it might be a bit perilous, like the note could go different directions. Then again, getting a consistent amp score is really challenging, and that is still a promising solution.
Yeah, I think their amp will be fairly consistent. I like overall that it's like few mechanisms for the entire thing, and it seems to work for, like, that intake is working for everything.
Yeah, the intake is working for everything, but also like they have a wrist system for their amp, and being able to just use that for the intake and then pass it over to their shooter, and their wrist just bends over just for them to shoot. It really impressive, and their climb is also just 2 hooks that just climbs on really simple.
One of the things I will say with this, James, you talked about documentation. They did end up releasing a bunch of videos onto their YouTube page. I think it was a little bit after when we started doing rankings on things. So there are a decent amount of videos out there. They're very short, which isn't necessarily bad or anything like that out there. But you know, when you're doing a robot in 3 days and stuff, getting as much out there that is valuable, obviously, as well too. It definitely helps with that. And some of those videos started coming out a little bit later. So for teams wise, I hope you did get a chance to see the RI3D Purdue team, because there's a lot of great things that go into this. And make sure you do go and take a look at their YouTube page for all the videos that they do have. In number 4 is RI3D at Penn State. Great practicality, pretty darn good looking performance robot, and some great things to really take away for teams on this. I know we'll be talking about that intake and that arm, Nick. So walk us through this team and machine.
Penn State provided a very solid amp score bot. It can effectively collect off the floor, reliably score the amp, and shows a solid climber. This looks like a really solid option for teams that want to target amp cycles to look at. It appears relatively simple, sturdy, and reliable. Their documentation is also solid. They have a detailed build thread showing a lot of the process they took, as well as documentation of what did and didn't work. In my view, showing what didn't work is possibly more important than what did, because teams can then skip the process of those failures.
Yeah, this robot it's good. And I love their amp it's the very good amp scoring. Like you can't miss with that amp scoring.
I also love that everything is basically just one mechanism, is just their intake, and they just put everything into the amp, and that their climb mechanism is also just pretty simple as well, and they just do back and forth motions, and it's been working really, really well for them.
When I first saw the game reveal, this was the robot that I would have thought would have been the kit bot or would have been every bot in another year. It's just super simple, easy to make. There's really only 1 degree of freedom if you don't count the wheels. But one thing that I do think is slightly overlooked is, God, those bumpers are beautiful. I'm a fan of really nice bumpers, and just having a robot with full bumpers that looks nice interacting with field elements is super helpful, because people will make prototypes and just shove them against the field element and forget about that 2.5 inch gap that they're gonna need this year.
James, you bring up a really good point with the kitbot thing as well too. Like this is almost like, as you mentioned, if there was a kitbot that was amp focused, this might be what you see. And I think that's a great way to describe why we like the Penn State team so much as well, because it's something that was a little bit more unique on the R3D side, still performed really well. You mentioned before how underrated the amp truly is. So there's a lot of great things that Penn State was bringing here. So great job to that team from documentation and from overall performance. Coming in our top 3 is UMN Robotics Ri3D. A lot of you might remember this team as Snow Problem back in the day, but making great robots every single year for Ri3D. Samantha, tell us more about this team and this robot.
Yeah, well, we all love a good U of M robot. This robot is nice, like pretty small package. It's slick. The under the bumper intake is not getting stuck on anything, and it can just score. And one thing I noticed is they got the center of gravity hook down. Like I think they might be the only one on this list with one hook, as far as I remember. Boom, center of gravity. I love it.
I also just love that they just drive over the game piece and basically touch it and own it. And with this type of game where you can only hold one game piece, it could be really useful, but also kind of a small disadvantage if you just drive over another one. But if you just turn off your wheels, your intake, and you won't be able to pick up the game piece anyways. But overall, just love the small package, and just love the touch and own it intake of just driving onto the game piece.
Yeah, like Tyler said, I have been a fan of this team for years. When they were under Snow Problem, they always made very unique, very different robots, and that continued this year. None of the other ones look like this. Like, they have a very unique silhouette. It reminds me of the term that we used for 118 in 2013, where it was like a copy machine. It's very blocky, very simple looking, but does a lot in that space. This is the robot that I could see being a robot that would just dominate early events. Small, easy to fix, easy to make sure that it's going to work in every match, and can do all aspects of the game except for the trap. But it's just super simple, super easy to replicate. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan as well. One thing I found really interesting is, as far as I know, they're the only Ri3D team to have gone for pneumatic tires. I just thought it was interesting, and also they can do a lot of things reliably, and they can also stay within their frame perimeter almost all of the time, giving all of their components better protection from any potential defense damages.
Two things that I noticed on this team that really stand out to me. One is I think they fixed what Cranberry Alarm was trying to do in regards to amp scoring, where it was, you have your note coming out of that shooter, right? But then they add this extra little flap that you'll see on there that allows the notes to essentially kind of bounce off and just slide back in for it. So I think that's really interesting. The second thing I want to ask is, anybody know what those two little like pistons in front of the robot, what that's used for? Is that just for centering notes on the intake, or could it be something else?
I assumed it was to keep the note from, or like getting under the wheel, to kind of give that protection there.
Oh, like a wheel guard or something like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was like a bolt sticking out.
It might be.
Yeah. So you
Yeah,
don't want to run over those, the notes.
Yeah, no, it's just two bolts that help guide the note into their intake.
All right, this is a note for teams then. If you're going to do something like that, please make sure you do not entangle with the carpet, because that can be a very easy way to rip holes in carpet for things. But, overall, the UMN Robotics team, hopefully they're very proud of their design, because I think this is a very practical design for teams to build off of. A lot of good documentation here. And make sure you check out their code and their CAD that's available as well, too. So congratulations to UMN Robotics for number 3 in this year's list. Coming in at number 2 this year, they were our number 1 team last year on this list, but it is the Cranberry Alarm Robot in 3 Days team. Perfect score on practicality, performance-wise, 8.75, and wow, 3.75. So, Tassif, you and the panel went through and judged this on here, so I'd love to hear your notes and thoughts in regards to Cranberry Alarm and the robot overall, named Flipside.
Yeah, so with Cranberry Alarm partnered with Fun this year. Of course, there's a bunch of documentation on the Fun YouTube channel, bunch of details, explanation, iterations that they made. I remember early in the build that they decided to change their intake completely, and this intake now is working really, really well. They have a really clean pass-through, really fast pass-through overall. Their pivot for their intake is just amazing, putting everything in, and they're able to shoot into the speaker. They're able to put the note into the amplifier, and they're able to just climb with 2 hooks. So overall, just really fast robot, and just really, I know this is 3-speed, but still overall really fast, and just able to do everything required on the field other than the trap. But overall, really love the documentation, explanation, and everything they went through.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Cranberry Alarm last year and their very simple take on last year's game. And this year, it's still a super simple robot, but it's way more competitive than last year's outing. Their intake, like Tassif mentioned, they redid it. And this handoff style intake is very similar to what teams used in 2018 and last year, where you acquire the game piece and then move it over to your scoring mechanism. And unlike some of the other ones that we saw earlier, this one's quick. Like, there's not going to need to be a lot of PID tuning, because by the time you're leaving your source area, that your intake's already back inside of you and out of the way.
Yeah, that's one of the big things I really liked about this. It's a fairly simple robot, and it also looks like it can be really effective. Also, obviously, this team has the advantage that they were shown on Fun, so inherently, more people knew about their resources. I know, for example, my alum team was posting these videos to the Discord with relative frequency. So they have the amp score. They didn't quite get it super consistent, but with what some of the other RI3D teams have shown, I think they could get it there, just with a couple more tweaks.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite robots ever. It's just very good. The amp could definitely be better, and of course it could have a trap thing, but that intake and that shooter and the handoff, yes.
One thing I just want to mention with the intake coming up a couple times, that original intake, that belt intake that was used in that, is our most viewed video so far for Robot in 3 Days. I think it's just sitting around 26,000 views at time of recording for things. And it was really interesting because why they went away from that intake was not because it wasn't practical. They went away from it because from a packaging standpoint, for what they wanted to do, it just wouldn't work within their packaging for their CAD of things as well. So, the intake they switched to, very effective as well. But I actually think that polybelt intake that they had on their robot is something that a lot of teams could still utilize for an intake as well too. So, on my end, I don't vote in this as well, but we're very proud to work with Cranberry Alarm this year. They were a great team with a huge mission of like, hey, let's make robots and content and documentation that's going to benefit teams in first. And I think that's what RI3D is all about, is not just building a robot and be like, hey, cool, here's a robot sort of thing. We're living our glory days. Like, let's do something that's going to help benefit the first community. So on our end, it's fun. It was great to work with a team, that we have in many years, but Cranberry Alarm's first time we worked with them, where they were very focused and very aligned with what that goal was. So congratulations, Cranberry Alarm, a great performance and a great robot. Coming in at number 1 this year for the Crescendo R3D rankings list, for the first time ever, we are giving a perfect score to the number 1 team, Unqualified Quokkas, depends what country you're from and how you pronounce it on that, but an incredible performance by this team. We were absolutely blown away what they had to bring in, and we got a lot to talk about them. So James, give us a rundown of this robot and your thoughts.
All hail the undisputed king of robot in 3 days. The Unqualified Quokkas is a first-year robot in 3 days team made up of alumni and mentors from across Australia. Just wow, this may be the most out-of-the-gate competitive robot in 3 days of all time. Their robot has the ability to score all game objectives besides the trap in the most efficient and effective way possible. Having the intake, amp scorer, speaker scorer, and climber all integrated into a single pivoting mechanism is just such beautiful packaging. I cannot praise this robot and team enough. Their documentation is top-notch. This team should be the one of the most duplicated teams this year, as this robot can be built super quick, and then you can spend the rest of your season just making small optimizations and driving this robot as much as possible. I really look forward to not only what this robot in 3 days team does, but all the robots coming out of Australia with this very dedicated group of mentors heading back to their own teams. Now, like we said last year, Cranberry Alarm took our number 1, so who knows? Maybe next year there's a trip to Australia in Tyler and Samantha's future to document this team.
Yeah, this team just... When I first saw them, I was blown away at what they could do. I did not expect to see a team this good come out of RI3D, period. They have... Everything's reliable. At least from the video, everything appears reliable. They can do amp, speaker, they drive well, they have a pretty solid climber. And to me, it almost looks like the kind of robot where if you put enough tweaking time into it, and I'm not saying I can endorse this for every team because it would be a lot of time, but if you put in a really deep pull-down climber, it almost looks like the kind of bot that might be able to attempt the trap.
Yeah, I was totally geeking out watching this video. Like, wow, okay. And I'm trying to think of what they could improve on. Okay, obviously the trap. And they could get some tuning and some really good drive practice to get really efficient. But there's not a ton else. Like, they are just so cool. And I love it.
I generally are wondering if any of these mentors and alum were sleeping the 3 days they were building this robot. Because genuinely, like, they probably thought of everything other than the trap, because all R3Ds couldn't do the trap. But overall, they were able to do everything. They even designed a buddy climb, which they didn't put on their final robot, but they designed it and it worked. It was basically showing off 2018 148 buddy climb system. But overall, just an amazing robot, especially for a first time RI3D team, able to do almost everything. Just speechless.
Yeah, James, I don't know if Australia is quite in our budget for next year, but I mean, we were very happy to work with Cranberry Alarm, so don't get me wrong. But yeah, this team, absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't seen their Cheap Delphi thread, make sure you go on that, because that's where a lot of their documentation really is there. And one of the reasons we do this video in particular is to highlight teams that, this team got a lot of attention within that Cheap Delphi community, and we want to be able to show this team more abroad to even more people who haven't had a chance to see this robot, because it is so well deserving, and all the other robots that are on the R3D list as well too. But yeah, this robot overall very cool. What a boss move, by the way, with the self-righting mechanism, something that I don't think I've ever seen on a robot in 3 days team ever. So things like that. There's just that little extra special things that get brought in. For me, this robot is well deserving of a perfect score for things. Some people would be like, oh, perfect score means you can never get better. But in this case, for this year of what this robot was, this was a perfect R3D robot overall. And congratulations to everybody who put in the efforts to make this robot happen. You know, the inspiration that hopefully you're going to bring around. I can't wait to see when we go and do interviews for Behind the Bumpers and just going and see teams, like how many teams are going to take inspiration from things like that. I think about last year, you know, where we saw a lot of people taking inspiration from 111, from 3005, from Redux, from Cranberry Alarm last year. This is going to be that robot that we see tons of inspiration of in the Crescendo game being taken from, and I just can't wait to see what that all brings. So absolutely phenomenal performance and very well deserving of our #1 spot here on the Crescendo Robot in 3 Days rankings list. Well, that about does it for our Robot in 3 Days Crescendo rankings. Congratulations, by the way, to our #1 team, an incredible design, and thank you to all teams who put in the effort to help inspire and impact in a positive way these incredible FRC teams. They definitely have a big challenge ahead of them. Don't forget, if you have any comments, make sure you leave them below. Let us know, by the way, what your rankings would be, how they'd be different, who maybe you thought should be in #5 or something like that, and anything you wanted to see more of Robot in 3 Days teams as well. Give the video a thumbs up, it really does help, and don't forget to subscribe to Fun's channel and stay up to date on all Fun content. We have so much coming for the Crescendo season and can't wait to jump into so many more things that we have. That's going to be it for Fun. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on First Updates Now. This video on Fun is brought to you by viewers like you and also in partnership with the following. AndyMark is your one-stop shop for all your robotics competition needs. Celebrating 20 years of quality robotics parts and superior service, AndyMark employees have over 200 years of first-team experience. From mechanical and electrical products to tools and hardware, head on over to andymark.com for high-quality and affordable solutions. Discover how Kettering University students engineered their success with Kettering's amazing co-op employment programs where students earn great pay and gain valuable experience. Those accepted into Kettering University can apply for a robotics scholarship, providing up to an additional $5,000 a year in tuition assistance. Head on over to kettering.edu/first to learn more and apply.